MS Simpson, please, the floor is yours for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished members of the CRPD Committee, Madam Chair of the Task Force on the General Comment, Ms. Gertrude Fefoame, ladies and gentlemen, following this important event online, I am pleased to speak on behalf of the International Disability Alliance. The IDA is an alliance of 8 global and 6 regional networks of organizations of persons with disabilities. Through our network, we represent 1,100 organizations of persons with disabilities and their families in more than 180 countries. IDA is grateful for the opportunity to participate in this day of general discussion in the lead up to a very necessary general comment on Article 27 of the CRPD. It is my pleasure to share this panel with Ms. Susan Scott Parker, the CEO of Business Disability International, who has great experience in helping private businesses include persons with disabilities. Improving the employment opportunities of persons with disabilities requires concerted efforts from states, organizations of persons with disabilities, trade unions, employers, and investors. Our shared commitment requires open dialogue. The COVID-19 pandemic hit economies very hard around the world, leaving many unemployed, creating many challenges, causing social commitments to be sidelined, and triggering many reflections on how things typically have been done. Efforts to build back better should enhance the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the labor market, not as an afterthought, but by design in every nation, taking into consideration the diverse situations of national economies, for example, in terms of internet connectivity. I will share what the IDA considers to be necessary measures to enhance employment and access to employment of persons with disabilities worldwide, and to eradicate egregious and discriminatory practices. But let me first set the scene. Persons with disabilities everywhere achieve lower employment rates than others, and the situation is worse for women with disabilities. In addition, given the global concern about access to employment by young people, youth with disabilities face unfair disadvantages. For many persons with disabilities, their only opportunities are for part-time jobs, informal employment, or self-employment, all characterized by lower incomes, less security, and worse working conditions. The COVID-19 pandemic caused and is causing an unprecedented economic crisis that has a multiplier effect on the precarious situation of persons with disabilities in employment everywhere. While there might be positive developments here and there, the situation is critical. If implemented in line with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Sustainable Development Agenda Goal 8 on decent work and economic growth and Goal 4 on quality education together provide a strong framework for states to promote decent employment of persons with disabilities. State-driven actions need to be adopted in consultation with and with the involvement of persons with disabilities through their representative organizations. States should coordinate with other stakeholders, including trade unions and the private sector. For example, the UN priorities for responsible investment might bring new opportunities if its signatory investors can be helped to see that disability is a key aspect of any sincere diversity efforts as they work to address the SDGs. States should ensure that mainstream labor laws, including both legislative and regulatory frameworks, are fully compliant with the CRPD. Laws and regulations should include detailed provisions on non-discrimination on the basis of disability, intersectional discrimination, and provision of reasonable accommodation. It is important for provisions to cover all stages of the employment cycle, from recruitment through retirement. This would include, for instance, individualized assessments of candidates regarding essential functions of the job, consideration of the duties to provide reasonable accommodation and support measures, reassignment to another job position if made necessary by an acquired impairment, and confidential management of disability-related data. States need to undertake various initiatives to ensure these concepts reach employers, legal practitioners, and even job seekers with disabilities themselves by developing guidance and engaging with stakeholders through conferences, trainings, and partnerships. Ending discrimination on the basis of disability also requires addressing emerging discriminatory practices, such as those occurring through the use of artificial intelligence and automated software for recruitment. People who provide care to persons with disabilities often experience discrimination by association, which may be addressed through the provision of reasonable accommodation to ensure flexible arrangements when necessary for duties of care, and through efforts to prevent compromising the household income and the capacity for addressing the requirements of persons with disabilities. Available data confirm the overall picture as described here, but data are still scarce and incomplete. Data collection and disaggregation are essential to assess the situation, track and monitor progress, and evaluate any measure that promotes employment of persons with disabilities. National statistics offices and social protection systems can improve their related practices using tools that have been developed by the Washington Group on Disability Statistics and the International Labor Organization. Data production should cover the diversity and complexity of the situation of persons with disabilities, including disaggregation by disability, age, gender, type of employment, type of salary, type of barriers encountered, and geographical location. As highlighted on Monday, intersectional identities should be very carefully addressed in data sets in order to address the situation of specific groups of persons with disabilities, such as LGBT persons with disabilities or Indigenous persons with disabilities. The data should be made available in accessible formats to disabled researchers and organizations of persons with disabilities, allowing advocates and decision makers to better identify inequalities among the diverse groups of persons with disabilities, as well as inequalities between disabled persons and other groups. Let us be clear, there are some practices that we simply cannot continue to accept in the 21st century. States need to address these immediately. I am referring first to any situation of forced labor, modern slavery, or exploitation of persons with disabilities, regardless of its legality at the country level, such as those highlighted by speakers on Monday. These kinds of practices, including, for instance, exploiting persons with disabilities by forcing them to beg in the streets, should be prosecuted under criminal law and perpetrators sanctioned. Practices such as sheltered workshops that subject persons with disabilities to working conditions much below what is commonly acceptable, including through salaries under the minimum wage, through lack of access to social protection, through lack of access to labor rights or benefits, and in segregated settings, must be eradicated. States should ensure that exploitation and segregation are no longer seen as acceptable or profitable business models. Perhaps this was the best we could do in former days. Now we know better, so we must do better. This transition will not be achieved overnight. Therefore, states need to start now to redirect funds allocated to these practices while allowing persons with disabilities to transition safely and with support into employment in the open market. This should be done while at the same time not imposing undue hardships on persons who may require meaningful support during the day, even if agencies are not able to find them employment with support in open markets. Nor should the actions impose hardships on persons whose disabilities or co-occurring medical conditions honestly require part-time work schedules or protected environments. On the positive side, IDA celebrates the efforts that states have undertaken to promote the employment of persons with disabilities through specific measures. We expect that continuous improvement will be required, and we offer our expertise and consultation to help states review and improve their practices to achieve better outcomes. we would direct attention specifically to the following 6 needs. First, we see a need for increased access to inclusive education and vocational training. It is simply true that inclusive education is the best foundation for lifetime employment. Vocational training should be very much connected to the economic reality of the context and should be flexible enough to promote multiple pathways to employment. Second, we see a need for increased awareness-raising measures directed to persons with disabilities on their employment rights and to employers on their duties, but also on the talents and abilities they can discover by adopting employment practices in environments that include persons with disabilities. Third, we see a need for enhanced accessibility of working environments, strengthening accessibility-related legislation and regulations and related monitoring and complaint mechanisms to contribute to the autonomy of persons with disabilities in the workplace, but also to their security and safety in case of emergencies. Fourth, we see the need to improve quota measures currently adopted by more than 100 countries in order to ensure that they do not lead to stereotyping practices such as reserved posts, restricting persons with disabilities to low-skilled positions, that they benefit equitably the diversity of persons with disabilities, in particular the most marginalized, namely people with intellectual disabilities, and those who face the most significant barriers or have high support needs, and that they are effective and enforceable and monitored and evaluated based on data disaggregated by gender and type of disability to assess whether the benefit is distributed equitably, as explained previously. Fifth, we see a need to consider the specifics of companies when designing specific measures. For instance, a fiscal incentive might be irrelevant for a big business organization, but relevant for a small startup company. Fines for lack of compliance might likewise be irrelevant for big companies, but improving their image and reputation as champions of inclusion or as a socially responsible investment might be an incentive. Sixth, we see the importance of ensuring that social protection schemes do not discourage unemployed or underemployed persons with disabilities from engaging in any legal and registered economic activity. While having touched upon some key elements, IDA also looks forward to hear the views and experience of all other participants and to fruitful exchanges during this day of general discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muy bien.